Hi, I'm Anna. I'm 27, and recently, I got married. A wedding is supposed to be one of the happiest moments of your life, right? Well, mine wasn't exactly a fairy tale. What should have been a beautiful celebration spiraled into a chaotic mess, all thanks to my family, who seemed determined to turn my big day into a drama fest. But let me start from the beginning, and trust me, there's a lot to unpack. I grew up in a family where I never quite felt like I belonged. My mom, Elaine, was the classic diet-obsessed parent, constantly pushing her expectations onto me. My dad, Richard, only ever cared about money, investments, profit margins, and anything that promised a return. If a conversation wasn't about finances, he wasn't interested. Then there's my older sister, Sarah. Calling her a nightmare is an understatement. For as long as I can remember, she's been the golden child. The spotlight was always on her while I was pushed into the shadows. She had a remarkable talent for making my life miserable, often twisting situations so I ended up looking like the bad guy. We never had a good relationship, and honestly, I don't think we ever will. The one person who genuinely cared about me was my grandma Margaret. She was warm, loving, and made me feel like I mattered when no one else did. Then there was Aunt Jane, my dad's sister. Aunt Jane was the cool, fun adult who made childhood a little more bearable. But when I was 13, Aunt Jane suddenly disappeared from our lives. I didn't know why, and before I could figure it out, I was shipped off to boarding school, feeling more alone than ever. Boarding school wasn't my choice. It was Sarah's doing. She despised the idea of sharing attention, so she made it her life's mission to turn me into the family scapegoat. Whenever something broke at home, it was always my fault. I'll never forget the time she smashed Mom's precious vase and then turned on the waterworks, accusing me of doing it. Another time, she spilt red juice all over the white living room couch and framed me for being careless. My parents, of course, believed her every time. The final straw came when Sarah broke a family heirloom, a crystal bowl that had been passed down for generations. She blamed me, and my parents didn't hesitate to send me away. Out of sight, out of mind. Boarding school taught me independence. It also taught me that my parents weren't going to show up for me, ever. They missed every recital, every science fair, every achievement. After a while, I stopped hoping they'd care. When I finished school and returned to my hometown for college, I hoped things would be different. Maybe, just maybe, my family would see me as someone worth their time. But living with Sarah again was like stepping into a war zone. She was the queen bee of our college, popular and well-liked, while I tried to keep a low profile. Of course, that didn't sit well with her. She made sure to humiliate me at every opportunity, making snide comments in front of her friends or throwing parties and leaving me off the invite list. The worst betrayal came during prom. I caught Sarah with my boyfriend Tom. She didn't even bother to hide it, practically gloating in my face. It was like she wanted to prove that everything I had could be hers. I turned to my mom for support, hoping for some understanding, but she brushed it off like it was nothing. That was the moment I decided to leave. I moved to another city, cut ties, and started fresh. College was different in my new town, peaceful, drama-free, and I finally felt like I was building a life for myself. I met Ethan, the man who would later become my husband. He treated me with kindness and love, something I wasn't used to. For the first time in my life, I felt cherished. We got engaged, and planning our wedding was a joy, at least at first. I shared the news with my family, hoping for a sliver of excitement. Instead, I got a half-hearted, "Oh, that's nice." They didn't seem to care much, but I didn't let that dampen my spirits. My mom suggested I hold the wedding in my hometown. Honestly, the idea didn't sit well with me. My life was in my new city, and I wanted to celebrate my marriage there. So I stayed firm and planned the wedding locally, with the incredible support of Ethan's family. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law were everything my family wasn't: supportive, helpful, and genuinely excited for me. When it was time to send out invitations, I intentionally left Sarah off the list. I knew I didn't want her anywhere near my wedding, but my mom noticed. She called me up, accusing me of making a mistake. I told her it wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. I didn't want Sarah there. I didn't want someone who had betrayed me so deeply to ruin my day. But Mom wouldn't listen. She argued that I was being petty and holding grudges, insisting this was a perfect opportunity to rebuild our bond. A bond that, let's be honest, never existed. When I refused, she dropped the bomb. If I didn't invite Sarah, none of my family would come. I was stunned. It was clear that my feelings didn't matter to them. Only keeping up appearances did. That's when I made a decision. If they were going to play dirty, so would I. I decided to invite Aunt Jane. She was the one person my parents couldn't stand, and I knew her presence would send a message. If my family was going to make my wedding about drama, I'd show them I wasn't backing down. Reaching out to Aunt Jane wasn't easy. After all these years, I wasn't even sure she'd want to hear from me. But I knew deep down that she deserved to know the truth about my wedding and everything that was happening. So I tried calling her. No answer. I sent a few texts, but the silence stretched longer than I expected. I wasn't ready to give up. Something in me said I needed her there, not just for the wedding, but because she was one of the only people who ever made me feel seen. So I decided to take a chance and visit her in person. I found out she lived just a couple of hours away. The drive felt longer than it was. My stomach churned with anxiety the whole way there. When I knocked on her door, I half expected her to slam it in my face. But she opened it, eyes cautious and guarded. Her voice was cool when she asked, "Anna, what are you doing here?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. About Sarah, about how my parents were demanding I invite her to my wedding, about how they threatened not to come if I didn't, and most importantly, how I wanted her there because she was family to me in a way they never were. Her face softened as I spoke. She invited me inside, and we sat down for tea. The awkwardness slowly melted away as she listened. When I finished, she let out a long sigh and said, "Anna, I wish I could say I'm surprised, but your parents have always been good at playing games." Then she told me her story. The reason she disappeared all those years ago. My parents had spun a web of lies, convincing Grandma that Aunt Jane was planning to run off with a boyfriend and abandon the family. They poisoned Grandma's mind against her, and when Aunt Jane tried to explain, they blocked every attempt. Dad even went so far as to pretend to be Grandma, sending hurtful messages to Jane. It was a mess of betrayal and manipulation. Hearing this broke my heart. It was like the puzzle pieces of my family's dysfunction were finally falling into place. Aunt Jane had suffered the same fate I had, cast out and framed as the villain. When I asked her to come to my wedding, she hesitated. "Are you sure, Anna? This could cause even more problems." "I'm sure," I said. "I want someone there who actually cares about me." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Okay, I'll be there." With that, a small weight lifted off my shoulders. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had an ally. The day of the wedding arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. I wanted everything to go smoothly, but part of me knew that with my family involved, chaos was almost guaranteed. I held onto Ethan's hand as we prepared for the ceremony, trying to focus on the love we shared and not the storm that was brewing. Sure enough, Sarah arrived with my mom, both of them radiating judgment and negativity. Sarah didn't even bother with fake smiles. Her eyes swept the venue with a look of disdain, and she whispered something to Mom, who nodded in agreement. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. Their expressions said it all. Then they saw Aunt Jane. The shock on my mother's face was almost comical. Her eyes widened, her jaw tightened, and she stormed over to me, barely holding in her rage. "What is she doing here?" she hissed through clenched teeth. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice calm. "She's here because she's family, and because this is my wedding, Mom, not yours." Her face turned red. "This is a mistake, Anna. You're ruining everything." "No, Mom," I said firmly. "I'm finally standing up for myself." I turned away before she could respond, focusing on the reason we were all there. To celebrate my love with Ethan. My sister-in-law, Megan, noticed the tension and gave me a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Anna. We've got your back." Her support meant everything. With her help, the ceremony started, and for a brief moment, it felt like nothing could ruin the day. But of course it didn't last. After the ceremony, during the reception, things began to unravel. Aunt Jane took Grandma aside to finally have the conversation they'd been denied for years. They disappeared into a side room, and almost immediately, my parents panicked. Dad started banging on the door, yelling that they needed to stop whatever they were doing. Mom was right there with him, her voice shrill with desperation. I tried to intervene, asking them to give Aunt Jane and Grandma some space, but they turned on me instead. "Why are you doing this, Anna?" Dad shouted. "Why do you always have to create drama?" "Me?" I shot back. "I'm not the one causing drama. You are. You've been doing it my whole life." His face contorted with anger. "You've always been the problem child. You're a disappointment." The words stung more than I wanted to admit. But before I could crumble, Ethan stepped in. "That's enough," he said firmly. "If you can't behave, you need to leave." My mother-in-law backed him up, her voice icy. "This is Anna's day. Either respect that or get out." Dad's face turned purple, but he saw he was outnumbered. He shouted one last insult before security escorted him and Mom out. The humiliation on their faces was almost satisfying. Almost. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan wrapped his arms around me. "It's over," he whispered. "They can't hurt you anymore." I nodded, holding on to him like a lifeline. Despite everything, the reception continued. I danced, I laughed, and for the first time I felt free. That's when I realized Sarah was still there. And she was up to her usual tricks. She had gone live on social media, tears streaming down her face, spinning a sob story about how I had ruined the family and disrespected our parents. Her followers were eating it up, sending her sympathy and calling me every name in the book. I couldn't believe it. Even on my wedding day, she found a way to make everything about her. I needed to escape the chaos, so I called Grandma. To my relief, she answered, her voice calm and steady. "Anna," she said, "everything's going to be okay. Your aunt and I finally talked. We know the truth now." A wave of relief washed over me. At least something good had come out of this mess. After the chaos of the reception, I sank into a chair, trying to catch my breath. Ethan was by my side, his hand warm and steady on mine. The noise of laughter, music, and clinking glasses faded to a dull hum as I processed everything that had just happened. My sister Sarah had done her best to hijack my wedding. My parents had shown their true colors, choosing their twisted sense of control over my happiness. And yet, somehow, in the middle of all this mess, something good had emerged. Aunt Jane and Grandma had finally reconnected. Their years of pain and misunderstanding were starting to heal, right there in the middle of my wedding day. I clung to that thought, trying to remind myself that not everything was falling apart. Some pieces were finally being put back together. The reception started to wind down, and as guests began leaving, I spotted Aunt Jane and Grandma emerging from the side room. Grandma's eyes were red-rimmed, but her face was softer than I'd seen in years. Aunt Jane held her arm gently, like she was afraid to let go. I walked up to them, my heart pounding. "Everything okay?" I asked. Grandma gave me a small, tired smile. "Yes, Anna, it is now." Aunt Jane nodded, her own eyes shining. "We talked, really talked. There's a lot to fix, but at least now we know the truth." Relief swept through me. For once, a piece of the family puzzle was finally fitting where it belonged. I hugged them both tightly, tears threatening to spill again. "Thank you for being here," I whispered. Aunt Jane squeezed my shoulder. "Thank you for inviting me. You gave me the chance to finally heal." In that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. No matter what chaos my parents and sister caused, having Aunt Jane and Grandma there was worth it. After the last guest left and the venue was quiet, Ethan and I stood together, looking out over the empty hall. The decorations were slightly askew. Half-eaten plates of food were scattered across tables, and crumpled napkins lay like discarded memories. It wasn't the perfect wedding I'd imagined, but it was real. And it was mine. Ethan pulled me into his arms. "We did it," he murmured into my hair. "We survived," I laughed softly. "Barely, but we did." He tilted my chin up, his eyes full of warmth and love. "And now we get to start fresh. Just us." "Just us," I echoed, leaning into him. We stayed like that for a while, wrapped in each other's arms, letting the quiet settle around us like a comforting blanket. For the first time all day, I felt truly at peace. The next morning, reality came crashing back. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages and missed calls. Most of them were from my parents and Sarah. I didn't bother reading them. I knew exactly what they'd say. More blame, more guilt trips, more attempts to paint me as the villain. Instead, I called Grandma. She answered on the second ring. "Hi, sweetheart." "Hey, Grandma, how are you feeling?" She sighed, a mix of exhaustion and relief. "Better than I have had in years. Your aunt and I are going to spend some time together. We have a lot of lost years to make up for." "That sounds perfect," I said, my heart swelling. "You both deserve it. And you, Anna," she said gently. "You deserve peace, too." Her words settled deep in my chest. Maybe, for the first time, I was finally on the path to finding that peace. But peace wasn't going to come easy. As much as I wanted to ignore the storm brewing with my family, I couldn't escape it. Sarah's live-streamed sob story had gone viral, and the comments were brutal. People who didn't know me, who'd never lived my life, were calling me selfish, ungrateful, and heartless. It was like Sarah had taken my wedding, twisted it into her own narrative, and handed it over to the court of public opinion. I was furious, and I was done being the scapegoat. Ethan sat beside me as I scrolled through the endless stream of lies. "You don't have to put up with this," he said, his voice low and steady. "We can fight back." I nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time we did. We contacted a lawyer that afternoon." He listened carefully, taking notes as I explained everything. The years of manipulation, the lies, the public humiliation. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair looking thoughtful. "You have a solid case for defamation," he said. "Your sister's statements were not only false but damaging to your reputation. We can take legal action." Hearing those words felt like a door opening, a door to justice, to reclaiming my story. I wasn't the scared, voiceless kid they could push around anymore. I had a chance to fight back, and I was going to take it. Aunt Jane was right there with me. When I told her about the lawsuit, she decided to file one of her own against my parents for manipulation and emotional harassment. We were finally standing up for ourselves, refusing to let their lies control us any longer. My parents, predictably, went into full panic mode. They called, they texted, they begged us to drop the lawsuits for the sake of the family. When that didn't work, they turned to anger, hurling accusations and blame. Dad even claimed I was destroying the family, as if they hadn't been the ones to tear it apart in the first place. But their words didn't have the same power they used to. The guilt, the shame, the sense of being the problem, it was all fading away. I could see them clearly now, not as the towering figures of my childhood, but as flawed people who made their own choices. Choices I wasn't responsible for. Ethan, Aunt Jane, and Grandma stood by me every step of the way. Their support was a shield, protecting me from the worst of my family's venom. For the first time in my life, I felt like I had a real team behind me. As we prepared for the court battle, I realized something important. This fight wasn't just about the wedding or the lies. It was about taking back my life, my story, my truth. I was ready to stand up and be heard. The courtroom was colder than I expected. The air felt heavy, filled with the quiet murmurs of lawyers shuffling papers and the occasional creak of a chair. I sat next to Ethan, my hands clenched in my lap, heart pounding like a drum. This was it. The moment I would finally face Sarah and my parents, not as their scapegoat, but as someone who was standing her ground. Aunt Jane sat a few rows behind us, her presence a comforting anchor. Grandma couldn't be there, but she called me that morning, her voice strong despite her age. "Remember, Anna, you're doing the right thing. Don't let them make you doubt it." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I won't, Grandma." When the judge entered and the proceedings began, I took a deep breath. It was time to reclaim my story. My lawyer presented everything clearly. Screenshots of Sarah's live-streamed lies, the messages I received afterward, the way it damaged my reputation. The video of her fake tears played in the courtroom, her voice echoing off the walls. The room was silent except for the sound of her sobbing confession about how ungrateful I was, how I'd ruined the family. But this time, her performance didn't work. Sarah sat across from me, her face pale. Her lawyer tried to spin the story. It was a misunderstanding, an emotional reaction. She didn't mean any harm. But the evidence was there, cold and undeniable. When my lawyer finished, I took the stand. My voice trembled at first, but the more I spoke, the stronger I felt. I told the court about the years of manipulation, the constant betrayals, the way my family twisted every moment to make me the villain. I spoke about my wedding day, how it was supposed to be mine, but became yet another stage for Sarah's drama. By the time I finished, I felt like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time, I told my story without being interrupted, without someone twisting my words or making me feel like I was crazy. When Sarah took the stand, she tried to keep up the act. Her voice quivered as she talked about how much she loved me, how she only wanted the family to be together. But the judge wasn't buying it. The lies were too obvious, too well documented. The ruling came quickly. The judge found in my favor, ordering Sarah to retract her statements publicly and pay damages for defamation. As he read the judgment, I glanced at her. She was frozen, her mask of innocence finally slipping away, revealing the bitterness underneath. It was over. At least that part was. A week later, Aunt Jane had her day in court against my parents. It was harder to watch. Their betrayal ran deeper, their manipulation more tangled. But Aunt Jane was strong. She presented the texts, the emails, and the letters where my parents had poisoned Grandma's mind, cut Jane out of our lives, and filled the gaps with lies. My dad sat there, his jaw clenched, eyes blazing with barely contained rage. My mom's face was a mask of cold indifference, but every now and then, a flicker of fear slipped through. The evidence was too damning, their years of deceit laid bare for everyone to see. When the verdict came, the judge ruled in Aunt Jane's favor. My parents were found guilty of emotional and mental harassment. They were ordered to pay damages and given a restraining order. They couldn't contact Aunt Jane or come near her ever again. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness that it had come to this. Relief that the truth had finally won out. The aftermath was messy. My parents didn't take it well. They bombarded me with texts, blaming me for everything. "You destroyed this family. You're so ungrateful. We were only trying to do what's best for you." But their words didn't carry the same weight anymore. I'd heard those lines too many times to believe them. Their anger, their guilt trips, it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. Instead of replying, I blocked their numbers. I felt lighter immediately. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something new and unfamiliar: peace. The drama, the constant dread of what my family would do next, was gone. Ethan and I focused on our new life together. The house was quiet, filled with warmth and love. No more fights, no more accusations, no more walking on eggshells. Aunt Jane and Grandma started spending more time together, slowly rebuilding what my parents had tried to destroy. They visited us one weekend, bringing homemade pies and laughter. We sat in the living room, sharing stories, filling the air with something I'd always craved: belonging. I finally felt like I had a family. One afternoon, I got a call from Grandma. Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of something else: determination. "Anna," she said, "I've decided to change my will. Your parents aren't getting the house or the inheritance. It's going to you and Jane." I was stunned. "Grandma, you don't have to do that." "I know," she said softly, "but it feels right. After everything they did, they don't deserve it. You and Jane, you deserve a fresh start." Tears welled up in my eyes. "Thank you, Grandma." She paused. "I'm proud of you, Anna, for standing up for yourself." For the first time in my life, I felt proud of myself too. The fallout continued behind the scenes. My parents, desperate and furious, started calling my mother-in-law, trying to get her on their side. They sent her long messages, painting me as the villain, begging her to talk sense into me. But my mother-in-law wasn't fooled. She forwarded the messages to me, shaking her head. "They don't get to control you anymore, Anna," she said. "Not on my watch." I smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over me. I finally had people in my corner who saw the truth, who supported me without conditions. I wasn't alone anymore. Life wasn't perfect. There were days when the memories still stung, when I wondered if things could have been different. But those moments grew fewer. The noise of my past was fading, replaced by the calm of the present and the promise of the future. Ethan and I walked hand in hand through our new life, one where I was free to be myself, where love wasn't a weapon or a game, where family was chosen, not forced. I was finally free. In the weeks after the court rulings, I felt like I was finally breathing fresh air. The weight I'd carried for so long, the guilt, the shame, the constant sense of being wrong, was gone. It was like stepping out of a dark forest and into the light. But freedom isn't always quiet. Even after the verdicts, the echoes of my family's drama lingered. The damage they'd done wasn't something that could disappear overnight. Healing takes time, and I was learning to give myself the grace to let it unfold slowly. One morning, as I sat on the porch sipping my coffee, my phone buzzed. A notification popped up. Sarah's public apology. The court had ordered her to post a retraction on all her social media accounts, and she finally did it, though I could tell it wasn't heartfelt. The video showed her sitting stiffly, eyes empty, voice robotic. "I want to apologize to my sister Anna for the false statements I made about her. My actions were wrong, and I deeply regret the harm I caused." She barely made eye contact with the camera. I could hear the resentment bubbling under her words, but it didn't matter. The truth was out there now, and for once, she couldn't twist the narrative to suit her needs. I watched the video to the end, then closed the app and set my phone down. There was no satisfaction in her defeat, just a quiet sense of closure. The battle was over. I didn't need her approval or her apology to move forward. I already had everything I needed. Aunt Jane and Grandma visited often. Their bond was stronger than ever, and watching them mend what had been broken gave me hope for my own healing. We spent afternoons in the garden, the sun warming our faces, laughter filling the air. Sometimes we'd just sit quietly, enjoying the peace that had once seemed so impossible. One day, as we sat together, Grandma took my hand. Her skin was thin and wrinkled, but her grip was steady. "Anna," she said, her voice soft, "I regret not seeing the truth sooner. I let your parents blind me, and I can't change that. But I see you now, and I'm so proud of the woman you've become." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you, Grandma. That means everything to me." Aunt Jane smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "We're a family now, Anna. The kind of family that supports each other no matter what." I nodded, my heart full. This was the family I had always longed for. Not perfect, but real. Honest. Loving. Ethan and I settled into married life with a sense of calm that felt almost surreal. For so long, I'd been bracing for the next wave of drama, the next betrayal. Now, the days stretched out in peaceful simplicity. We cooked dinner together, took long walks, and dreamed about the future. A future that was finally ours to shape. One evening, as we watched the sunset from our porch, Ethan squeezed my hand. "Do you feel it?" he asked. "Feel what?" I smiled. "The quiet, the peace. It's like we finally closed the door on the past." I nodded, leaning my head on his shoulder. "Yeah, I feel it," and I did. The chaos of my family, the endless cycle of blame and hurt, was finally behind me. I'd drawn my boundaries, fought my battles, and come out stronger. My life was no longer defined by the shadows of the past. I was free to write my own story. But healing doesn't just mean cutting out the bad. It means making space for the good. I started reconnecting with parts of myself that I'd buried under years of survival. I picked up hobbies I'd forgotten about, painting, reading, even playing the piano again. Each moment felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. Aunt Jane and Grandma were my biggest cheerleaders. They encouraged me to explore, to grow, to embrace the joy I'd been denied for so long. And Ethan was by my side through it all, his love a steady presence that never wavered. One afternoon, Aunt Jane surprised me with an old photo album. We flipped through the pages. The pictures faded, but the memories alive. There were photos of me as a child, smiling, carefree, photos of her and Grandma, before everything fell apart. "This is who you've always been," Aunt Jane said, pointing to a picture of me with paint-smeared hands and a beaming grin. "Don't let anyone take that away from you again. I promised I wouldn't." The last piece of the puzzle fell into place when I decided to get a restraining order against my parents. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one. I needed to protect the peace I'd fought so hard to create. They could no longer barge into my life, bringing their chaos with them. My mother-in-law, ever the fierce protector, supported me fully. "They had their chance," she said. "You've given them more grace than they deserve." With the restraining order in place, the final thread connecting me to their toxicity was cut. It felt like a door closing, firm, final, freeing dot. As time passed, the noise of the past grew quieter. I didn't forget what happened, but it no longer defined me. The anger, the hurt, the confusion, they all faded, replaced by a sense of strength and clarity. I wasn't the girl they could control anymore. I wasn't the scapegoat, the problem child, the outcast. I was Anna, a woman who stood up for herself, a woman who chose love, truth, and freedom. And for the first time in my life, I felt whole.